Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the person you trusted most in this world, the man who stood beside you through every failure, every sleepless night, every breakthrough, had stolen your entire life. Not your wallet, not your car, your name. The invention you bled for, the patent that was supposed to change everything. Gone. Transferred. Buried under someone else's signature. And while you were struggling to keep the lights on and raise your kid alone, he was shaking hands with senators and accepting awards for work that was never his. This is that story. Stay until the end and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The call came on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Ethan Walker had learned over the years that Tuesdays had a particular cruelty to them. Not the dramatic crash of a Monday, not the slow grind of a Wednesday, but something specific and petty, like a universe that had thought about it overnight and decided to make things harder in a very targeted way. He was lying underneath a 1987 Cessna 172 when his phone buzzed against the concrete floor of the hangar. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. Area code 212. New York. He almost let it go to voicemail. Walker Aviation, he answered, because he always answered. You couldn't afford not to when you were a one-man operation with a 9-year-old depending on you. There was a brief pause on the other end. The kind of pause that came from someone who wasn't used to waiting and was recalibrating to the fact that they'd have to. Is this Ethan Walker? The voice was precise, controlled, female. It is. My name is Sophia Bennett. I was given your number by Gerald Haynes at Meridian Aero. Another pause, shorter this time. He said you were, and I'm quoting him directly here, the last honest mechanic left in the continental United States. Ethan wiped grease off his hands with a rag that was already too dirty to be useful. Gerald's generous. Gerald's desperate, she said flatly, which means I'm desperate. I have a Gulfstream G55. Oh, that's been grounded for 4 months. I've had 3 separate maintenance teams look at it. I've spent close to $200,000 in diagnostic fees alone, and I still cannot get that aircraft airworthy. My lawyers tell me I have options. My pilots tell me to buy a new jet, and Gerald Haynes tells me to call you. Ethan sat up slowly, his back popping in 2 places. He was 32, but some mornings his body moved like he was 50. What airport? Westfield Regional, New Jersey. What's the bird doing? Intermittent power failure during taxi. The avionics reset without warning. One of the teams thought it was the APU. Another thought it was a wiring harness issue near the tail. The third team, she stopped. The third team sent me a bill for $40,000 and a report that was essentially 6 pages of "we don't know." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He was already running through it in his head. G550, intermittent avionics reset, APU ruled out once already, wiring harness checked. There was something in the pattern of it that felt familiar, like a puzzle he'd seen a version of before, though he couldn't place where yet. I can come Friday, he said. I need someone Thursday. I have a custody arrangement on Thursdays. Another pause. This one different from the others, like she was deciding whether to push back. Friday works, she said. He told Noah about the trip that night over dinner, which was spaghetti with jarred sauce because Ethan had meant to make it from scratch and run out of time, which was the story of roughly 60% of his dinners. Noah was 9 years old and had his mother's dark eyes and Ethan's habit of going quiet when he was thinking hard about something. He stabbed a meatball and considered the news. Is it a big plane? Noah asked. Pretty big. Gulfstream G55. Private jet. Whose is it? A CEO. Woman named Sophia Bennett. Noah thought about this. Is she nice? I have no idea. I talked to her for 4 minutes. She sounds important. She sounds like someone who's used to people solving her problems quickly. Noah looked up. Can you solve it? Ethan twisted spaghetti around his fork. Probably. Dad. What? You always say probably when you mean yes. Ethan looked at his son across the scratched kitchen table in the yellow light of the overhead fixture that had been flickering for 3 weeks and that he kept meaning to replace. Something moved in his chest. That particular mix of exhaustion and something that wasn't quite pride but was close to it, Gratitude, maybe. That this kid existed. That this kid saw him. Yeah, Ethan said. I can solve it. Westfield Regional Airport sat about 40 miles outside of Manhattan, tucked between a logistics hub and a stretch of industrial buildings that had been trying to rebrand themselves as something called a business park since roughly 2009. The private aviation terminal was nicer than the rest of it. Marble floors, leather chairs, the kind of quiet that money buys. Sophia Bennett was waiting on the tarmac. Ethan had expected an assistant, maybe a facilities manager. Instead, he found a woman in a charcoal blazer and flat-heeled boots standing directly beside the aircraft, arms crossed, watching him park his truck with the expression of someone who had made a calculated risk and wasn't sure yet if it had paid off. She was younger than he'd expected. He wasn't sure why. The voice had given him an impression of someone older. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back and the particular posture of a person who had spent years being the most prepared person in every room and had gotten used to carrying that. Mr. Walker. She extended a hand. Ethan's fine. He shook it. Her grip was firm and quick, businesslike. He noticed her eyes went immediately to his tool bag, sizing up what he'd brought. This is the aircraft, she said, as if he might have mistaken it for the one next to it. I figured. He moved toward it, running his eyes along the exterior. The G550 was a beautiful machine. Low wing, twin engine, the kind of aircraft that cost $40 million new and still looked like it meant business 20 years later. He could see nothing obvious from the outside, which he hadn't expected to. Whatever this problem was, it wasn't living on the surface. Can you walk me through exactly what happens? He said. Not the report. What the pilots told you. Sophia blinked. A small recalibration. Most people, he guessed, led with the documentation. They said it happens during taxi, almost always within the first 3 to 5 minutes. The avionics panel resets, like a full cold restart. The engines stay running, but everything goes dark for about 4 seconds and then comes back up. Every time? Not every time. Maybe 60% of taxi sequences, which is part of why it's been so hard to... Intermittent faults are always harder, Ethan said, crouching to look at the nose gear housing. Consistent problems are easy. Intermittent ones mean something's marginal. It's functioning, but barely. Something small is pushing it over the edge under specific conditions. The second team thought it was thermal expansion. They replaced 3 connectors near the avionics bay. Didn't fix it. Evidently not. There was something dry in her voice, the residue of a lot of expensive disappointments. What do you need from me? Access to the avionics bay, the cockpit, and the maintenance logs going back 2 years. He stood up, brushing dust off his knee, and somewhere I can work without someone looking over my shoulder. She studied him for a moment. Not hostile, more like she was filing something away. There's a tech room in the terminal. I'll have the logs pulled. She started to turn, then stopped. I should also mention, she said it with a tone that suggested what was coming was something she'd decided to include reluctantly. I want you to understand what it means to me if you can fix this. I have a board meeting in Monaco in 12 days. I've been managing my travel around this aircraft being grounded for 4 months. If you can fix it, I will pay you whatever you name. Ethan had picked up his tool bag and was already heading toward the aircraft steps. I'll tell you what it costs when I know what's wrong with it. Most people don't pass up a blank check. Most people aren't trying to sleep at night, he said, and stepped aboard. He spent the first hour just reading. The maintenance logs were thorough. Somebody had kept good records, which helped. He went through them slowly at the terminal table, coffee going cold beside him, marking passages with a pen. The 3 separate teams had each zeroed in on different suspects. The first team had focused on the APU and the power distribution panel. The second had gone after thermal expansion in the connector pins, which was a reasonable theory, but apparently hadn't solved anything. The third team, the one that sent the $40,000 bill, had documented everything and concluded nothing. Ethan read their report twice. It was competent work, actually. Thorough. They had checked everything they should have checked, which meant whatever they'd missed wasn't something obvious. He went back into the aircraft. The avionics bay of a G550 was accessible through a panel in the nose section, a cramped, cable-dense space that required a person to crouch and work with their face about 18 inches from a wall of wiring. He'd been in worse. He worked methodically, not rushing, tracing each harness with his fingers, checking connections, looking for anything that looked slightly wrong. A connector that had been reseated too many times, a wire tie that was pulling slightly, insulation that had any rubbing wear to it, nothing obvious. He came back out, sat on the aircraft steps, and thought. Intermittent, triggered by taxi. Not by engine startup, not by flight. Taxi specifically. Taxi meant movement, vibration. Low-frequency rolling vibration from the wheels on pavement. He went back to the logs and found the entry he was looking for, a tire replacement 6 months before the problem started. Standard maintenance. Nothing notable. He went to the nose gear. It took him 20 minutes, lying on his back with a flashlight in one hand and a mirror tool in the other, to find it. It was inside the nose gear housing, in a location that required the mirror to see around a support bracket, a small ground bonding strap that had developed a hairline fracture in the copper braid. At rest, the fracture was closed. The strap functioned. Under rolling vibration, the fracture opened slightly, creating a momentary interruption in the ground path for the forward avionics bus. 4 seconds of darkness. Then the fracture closed again. Power restored. Intermittent. Rolling vibration specific, invisible to anyone who hadn't thought to look there, in that configuration. He sat back and looked at the piece for a long moment. It was smaller than his thumb. He'd seen this exact failure mode once before, not on a Gulfstream, but on a turboprop diagnostic model he'd helped design years ago. That was where he knew the pattern from. He'd built the logic for detecting precisely this kind of intermittent ground fault into a diagnostic system that could have caught this problem in 40 minutes rather than 4 months. But that was a different life. He stood up, went back inside, and replaced the strap. The test taxi took 11 minutes. He sat in the cockpit with the pilot, a careful, quiet man named Dennis, who had been flying this aircraft for 6 years and who had started to take the malfunctions personally, the way pilots sometimes did with machines they loved. They rolled the length of the taxiway twice. Then again. The avionics panel stayed lit the entire time. Steady, unblinking, perfect. Dennis looked at Ethan with an expression that was somewhere between relief and disbelief. "That's it?" Dennis said. "That's it." 4 months. Dennis shook his head slowly, looking at the instruments like he was apologizing to them. 4 months, and it was a ground strap. It was in a location nobody thought to check. The vibration pattern was specific enough that you had to already be thinking about rolling-induced ground faults to look there. Ethan unstrapped his harness. "It's not a common failure mode. I've seen it once before." Dennis looked at him. "Where?" Ethan was already moving toward the cockpit door. "A long time ago," he said. "Doesn't matter." Sophia was in the terminal when he came back in. She was on the phone, one of those calls that looked like it had been going on for a while. The kind where the person standing is doing most of the listening and most of the not liking what they're hearing. She saw him come through the door and read something in his face because she wrapped up the call in about 15 seconds with a tone that said, "We'll finish this later," to whoever was on the other end. "Well?" she said. "It's fixed." She stared at him. You've been here 4 hours." 3 hours and 40 minutes. The third team was here for a week. Ethan set his tool bag on the table and started making notes on his invoice pad. Hairline fracture in a nose gear ground bonding strap. It was inside the housing, behind a support bracket. You needed a mirror tool in a specific angle to see it, and you had to already be thinking about rolling-induced ground faults. He tore the invoice off and held it out. Parts and labor. No markup. Sophia took the paper and looked at it. He watched her face. There was something shifting in it, some calculation she was running. The number on the invoice was fair, reasonable, about a quarter of what any of the other teams had charged, and unlike them, it actually came with the problem solved. "This is significantly less than I expected," she said carefully. "You expected to overpay." "I expected to pay for the value of what I received." "You're paying for 3 hours and 40 minutes of my time and a $12 part," Ethan said. "I don't charge for 4 other teams failing. That's not your fault, and it's not mine." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something specific in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Not exactly admiration, but close to it. More like recognition. Like she was looking at something she didn't encounter very often and was noting the coordinates. Earlier, she said, before you went into the aircraft, I made you an offer. You did. And I want to. You don't need to. I was out of line, she said, and there was something in the way she said it that made it clear it wasn't easy for her. Not the apology itself, but the admission that she'd miscalculated, that she'd read him wrong. I'm accustomed to. I operate in environments where a certain kind of transaction is assumed. That was a mistake. It won't happen again. Ethan zipped his tool bag closed. I appreciate that. Can I ask you something? Sure. You said you'd seen that failure mode once before. Rolling-induced ground faults. Where? He was quiet for a beat, just a beat, but she caught it. He could tell from the way she went slightly more still. I spent some time doing diagnostic system design years back, he said. Before I had my own shop, I worked on a few avionics fault detection systems. Which systems? Nothing that went to market. He picked up his bag. I'll email you the full service report by end of week. He walked out into the afternoon light and got in his truck and sat there for a moment without starting the engine. He hadn't thought about the diagnostic system in over a year. He'd made a deliberate effort not to. It was easier that way, or at least it had seemed easier, the way it's easier to stop touching a bruise even though the bruise is still there. The ground strap, the rolling vibration, the precise failure pattern. He'd built a system that would have caught that in 40 minutes. He'd built it in a rented lab with bad lighting and 2 whiteboards covered in his own handwriting, and he'd been proud of it in a way he'd been proud of almost nothing else in his professional life. And then the system had been taken from him, quietly and legally and completely, by the person he'd trusted most in the world. He started the engine. He had to pick up Noah by 6. Thus, he got to the school 20 minutes early and sat in the parking lot with the radio off. The school pickup line at Jefferson Elementary was a masterclass in human impatience, a long queue of parents inching forward in vehicles that ranged from sensible Hondas to SUVs that cost more than Ethan's annual revenue, everyone performing the same ritual of looking at their phones and then at the doors, and then at their phones again, like checking more frequently might make the children emerge faster. Ethan didn't check his phone. He just sat. He was thinking about Brandon Pierce. He thought about Brandon the way you think about a scar on your hand, not obsessively, but the way your eyes land on it sometimes without you deciding to look. You see it. You remember how it got there, and you go back to whatever you were doing. The memory was old enough now that it didn't hurt the same way it used to. It had changed from sharp to dull, the way most old injuries do. They'd met in graduate school, aerospace engineering, University of Michigan, both of them 23 and broke and completely certain they were going to change something. Brandon was the kind of person who filled a room, loud in the best possible way, magnetic. The guy who knew everyone's name and made everything feel like it was worth doing. Ethan was quieter, more technical, better at sitting with a problem until it surrendered. They were different enough that they complemented each other, and for a few years that dynamic had felt like the best possible version of a partnership. The diagnostic system had been Ethan's idea mostly, but ideas needed execution, and Brandon was better at the business side. The filings, the presentations, the pitch decks. So Ethan had worked on the system, and Brandon had worked on making it real, and for a long time that arrangement had seemed fair. The school doors opened. Children flooded out into the afternoon, backpacks bobbing, teachers standing at the entrance like anchors against the current. Ethan watched for Noah's red jacket. He found him near the back of the crowd. Noah always came out late, always the last one, because he hated being in the middle of the rush. He walked with his head slightly down, earbuds in even though the school technically didn't allow them until dismissal was officially over, which was a rule Ethan had decided not to fight about. Noah spotted the truck and his face opened up. That immediate, unconsidered relief of a kid seeing their safe person at the end of the day. And he jogged over. "How was it?" Noah asked, climbing in, backpack first, negotiating the seatbelt around it the way he always did instead of taking it off. "Fixed it." "Already?" Noah looked at him with something that was clearly inherited skepticism. "It was a big plane. The problem was small. Most problems are." Noah thought about this. "What was wrong with it?" A tiny piece of copper wire had a crack in it, the size of a hair. Noah's eyebrows went up. That's it? That's it. And nobody else found it? Nope. Noah was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, was the CEO lady nice? Ethan pulled out of the parking lot and thought about Sophia Bennett standing on the tarmac in her charcoal blazer, looking at his tool bag like she was deciding whether to trust him. He thought about the way she'd apologized, not casually, not dismissively, but with the specific effort of someone who didn't do it often and was doing it anyway because it was right. She was okay, he said. Just okay? She was professional, and she was honest about being wrong about something. He glanced at his son. That's actually pretty rare. Noah appeared to be filing this information under a category he found mildly interesting. He plugged one earbud in and looked out the window. Dad? Yeah. You should charge more, Ethan almost laughed. What makes you say that? Because if everybody else charges a lot and can't fix it, and you charge a little and can fix it, you should charge more. Noah said this with the calm, logical certainty of someone who hadn't yet learned that money was complicated. It's just math. Ethan did laugh this time, a short, quiet one. You're probably right. I know I'm right. They drove home in the early evening light, through the familiar streets of the town that Ethan had chosen, not because it was impressive, but because it was manageable, and because the school was good, and because the hangar lease was affordable, and because manageable and affordable were the two words that a single father with a one-man business built his whole life around. He didn't think about Brandon again until after Noah was in bed. The service report took him most of Thursday evening to write. He was particular about documentation, more particular than most independent mechanics, probably more particular than was strictly necessary. But he'd learned early that the paperwork was as important as the work itself, that a poorly documented repair was almost as bad as no repair, and he'd never quite been able to shake the habit of treating a service report like a legal document. He emailed it to Sophia Bennett at 9:47 p.m. and didn't expect to hear back until the following week. She replied at 10:02 p.m. Mr. Walker, this is the most thorough service report I've received from any of the 4 teams. I have a few questions when you have time. Also, the name on the patent you referenced in Section 4, the ground fault detection methodology. Is the Ethan Walker in the academic citation the same Ethan Walker I hired today? SB. He stared at the email for a long time. The patent reference. He'd included it almost automatically, the way he always did when his work touched a methodology he'd developed or contributed to. Proper attribution, just good practice, old habit. He hadn't thought about what it might look like from her end. He typed back, the questions can wait until next week. And yes, same person. Doi. Her reply came back in under a minute. I thought so. Get some sleep, Mr. Walker. We'll talk soon. He closed his laptop and sat in the quiet of his kitchen, in the house where nothing was particularly new and several things needed fixing and the overhead light still flickered, and he thought about how strange it was, the way certain things found you, even when you'd spent years walking in the opposite direction. He didn't know what Sophia Bennett intended to do with that information. Probably nothing. She was a CEO. She had her aircraft back. She'd paid her invoice. That was the transaction. Complete. But she had noticed. That was the part that stayed with him. Not with hope exactly, because hope was something he'd gotten careful with over the years. But with a kind of quiet attention. The way you notice a change in the weather, not because you've made any plans around it, but because weather matters, and it's wise to pay attention to what's coming. He went to check on Noah. His son was asleep on his side, one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress the way he always slept, face completely slack, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of a kid with nothing on his conscience. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, not going in, just looking. 9 years old, dark eyes, his mother's cheekbones, Ethan's hands. He was the reason for every decision Ethan had made in the last 6 years. The reason for the small town and the affordable hangar and the invoice that charged for parts and labor with no markup and nothing extra. The reason for the careful, quiet, honest life that Ethan Walker had built out of the ruins of the one that had been taken from him. He pulled the door halfway closed and went to bed. In New Jersey, in a hotel suite 40 miles away, Sophia Bennett sat at a desk with a laptop open and a legal notepad beside it, and she was looking at a patent filing from 7 years ago, and her expression was very still. She was good at math, and the numbers didn't add up. Sophia Bennett had not built a company worth $400 million by being incurious. She had built it by asking questions that other people found uncomfortable, by following threads that other people let go, and by refusing to accept a tidy explanation when something underneath it felt crooked. It was not always a pleasant quality. Her COO had told her once, during a particularly difficult board review, that she had the instincts of a prosecutor and the patience of a surgeon, and he had not meant it entirely as a compliment. She had taken it as one anyway. So when she found the patent filing at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night in a hotel room in New Jersey, she did not close the laptop and go to sleep. She ordered another coffee from room service and kept reading. The filing was 7 years old, U.S. Patent Application 14/882441, titled Adaptive Ground Fault Detection System for Multi-Bus Avionics Architecture. It had been filed under the name of a company called Aerosynth Diagnostics, LLC, and the listed inventor was a man named Brandon Pierce. The abstract described a diagnostic methodology for detecting intermittent ground faults in aircraft avionics systems, specifically the kind of rolling vibration-induced failures that caused exactly the type of malfunction Ethan had just fixed on her Gulfstream. But in Ethan's service report, in a footnote at the bottom of Section 4, he had written, "Ground fault detection methodology consistent with principles developed during prior research. See Walker and Pierce, 2017. Unpublished technical paper, University of Michigan Aerospace Engineering Archive. Walker and Pierce." Sophia pulled up the university archive. The paper was there. 46 pages, dense with equations and diagrams, dated March 2017. Both names on the cover. Both names in the acknowledgments. The methodology described in the paper was, in every meaningful way she could assess, the conceptual foundation of the patent that Brandon Pierce had filed 8 months later, under his name alone. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she opened a new browser tab and searched for Brandon Pierce. The results were extensive and uniformly flattering. Brandon Pierce, 34, founder and CEO of Aerosynth Diagnostics, a company that had grown from a 2-person startup to a 40-employee firm with contracts across commercial aviation, private aerospace, and 3 government defense programs. He had been profiled in Forbes, in Aviation Week, in a long feature piece in Wired that described him as the engineer who taught aircraft to diagnose themselves. His company's flagship product, the Aeroscan system, was licensed by 17 airlines and used in maintenance programs at 6 major airports, including, she noted with a cold feeling in her stomach, by her own corporation. Bennett Aerospace Holdings had signed a licensing agreement for Aeroscan 14 months ago. She hadn't been directly involved in that deal. It had gone through her acquisitions team, but her name was on the corporate umbrella. Her company's money had gone to Aerosynth Diagnostics, to Brandon Pierce, to a patent that might not have been his to file. She closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the hotel room and thought about Ethan Walker, lying under her aircraft for 3 hours and 40 minutes, charging her for parts and labor with no markup, and filing a service report so thorough it had put 3 professional maintenance teams to shame. Then she thought about him saying, very quietly, a long time ago, "Doesn't matter." She picked up her phone. It was 11:43 p.m. She found the contact for her head of legal affairs, a woman named Carol Reyes, who had been with her for 6 years and who had the specific skill of not sounding annoyed when Sophia called after 11. Carol picked up on the 3rd ring. "Tell me it's something quick." "It's not something quick," Sophia said. "I need you to pull the full patent history on something called Aerosynth Diagnostics, and a filing number I'm going to text you. I need to know everything, the original filing, any amendments, any co-inventor disputes, any litigation. And I need to know who our licensing agreement is actually with." A pause. "Is this about the jet repair?" "Just pull the records, Carol." "It's midnight." "In the morning is fine." Sophia set her phone on the desk. "And Carol, don't mention this to anyone on the team yet. Just you and me for now. Another pause. This one waited differently. Carol had worked with her long enough to understand what that instruction meant, that Sophia had found something that might embarrass the company, or someone connected to it, and was being careful about who knew before she understood the full shape of it. Understood, Carol said, and hung up. Sophia looked at the hotel room ceiling one more time. Then she turned off the lamp and lay down in the dark and stared at the window and did not sleep for a long time. The next morning, Ethan was back under a different aircraft, a twin-engine Beechcraft belonging to a charter company that used his hangar for regular maintenance, when his phone rang again. Same area code, same number. He considered briefly, not answering. Walker Aviation. It's Sophia Bennett. No preamble. I have some questions about the service report I said could wait until next week. They can't wait until next week. He sat up, already reading the tone in her voice. There was something different in it from the day before. Less controlled, or controlled in a different way, like she was holding something carefully because it was heavier than she'd expected. All right, Ott, he said. The patent reference in your footnote. Walker and Pierce, 2017. Can you tell me about that paper? He was quiet for a moment. The hangar was quiet too. Just the ambient sound of the regional airport a quarter-mile away, the distant percussion of small engines and taxiing aircraft. It was a graduate research paper, he said. Brandon Pierce and I wrote it together in our last year at Michigan. It outlined the theoretical framework for a ground fault detection system in multi-bus avionics. And the patent that was filed the following year, Aerosynth Diagnostics, inventor Brandon Pierce. You're familiar with it? I'm familiar with it. Were you listed as a co-inventor? The pause he took was about 2 seconds long. No. Were you involved in developing the methodology that the patent describes? Another pause. Longer. Ms. Bennett? Ethan. Her voice was different, quieter, but more direct. I'm not asking because I'm looking for leverage. I'm asking because my company has a licensing agreement with Aerosynth, and I need to understand what that means if there's a problem with the patent's ownership. He sat there in the hangar with his phone against his ear and thought about how many times over the past 6 years he'd been asked, in various forms, to explain what had happened with the patent, by his own lawyer before he'd run out of money to keep paying a lawyer, by a couple of former colleagues who'd heard rumors. Once, in a phone call he still thought about occasionally, by Brandon himself, careful and indirect, the way you talk to someone when you're not sure what they know. He'd stopped explaining it because explanations hadn't gotten him anywhere. At some point, the energy required to keep telling a story that no one with power had any incentive to investigate had started costing more than he had. I contributed substantially to the methodology that the patent describes, he said. More than substantially. The core detection logic, the rolling vibration threshold analysis, the dual bus verification sequence, those came from my work. Brandon handled the business side of things. He did the filing. He had the company structure. I had the notebooks and the whiteboards and the... He stopped. It was 7 years ago. Do you have documentation? Sophia asked. Notebooks, drafts, emails, anything time-stamped? I have notebooks. I have emails. I have a draft of the patent application that has my name on it that's different from the one that was filed. He hadn't said that to anyone in years. Saying it out loud in the hollow of the hangar felt strange, like opening a door to a room where the air had gone stale. Sophia was quiet on her end. He could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, the breath of someone being careful with what they said next. I want to be clear about something, she said finally. I'm not your attorney, and I'm not making you any promises. But I have legal resources, and I have people who know patent law, and what you just described, if there's documentation to support it, is not a small thing. A beat. Brandon Pierce is scheduled to receive the National Aerospace Innovation Award in 11 days. It's being presented at a gala at the Meridian Grand in Manhattan. It's one of the most visible recognitions in the industry. Ethan said nothing. If his company's foundational patent has a legitimate co-inventor who was excluded from the filing, Sophia continued, that matters. To the award committee, to the licensing agreements, to the industry record. She paused. It matters to me. My company's name is attached to this. With respect, Ethan said slowly, your company's name being attached to it is a reason for you to want this resolved. It's not necessarily a reason I should trust that you want it resolved fairly. The silence that followed was not an offended one. It was, he thought, the silence of someone encountering an accurate point. That's a reasonable thing to say, she said. I don't have an answer to it right now that would mean anything. All I can tell you is that I found this on my own, I called you on my own, and nobody at my company knows I'm making this call. A pause. I'd like to come to your shop. When? Today. Tomorrow at the latest. He looked around the hangar, the Beechcraft in pieces, the workbench covered in parts, Noah's drawings taped to the office wall from the last time he'd brought him in on a school holiday. The particular private geography of a life he'd built carefully, brick by brick, around the wreckage of something else. Tomorrow afternoon, he said. After 1. She arrived at 1:15 in a rental car, alone. No assistant, no lawyer, no driver. Just Sophia Bennett in dark jeans and a navy jacket, carrying a leather portfolio and looking slightly less composed than she had on the tarmac. More human, somehow, in the fluorescent light of the hangar office. Ethan had made coffee. It wasn't good coffee. It was the kind that came from a machine that had been bought used and cleaned irregularly. But he'd made it, and she took the mug he offered without comment, which he noted. He'd put the notebooks on the table. 3 of them, spiral-bound, the covers soft with age and handling. He'd taken them out of the storage box that morning for the first time in almost 4 years, and just handling them had cost him something he didn't have words for, some particular combination of grief and anger and the specific exhaustion that comes from carrying something for too long. She sat across from him and opened her portfolio without ceremony. My legal team pulled the full patent history last night, she said. The original application, the one that was submitted to the USPTO, lists one inventor, Brandon Pierce. There's no amendment, no correction, no supplemental filing. She looked up. Under patent law, failing to list a co-inventor on a patent application is considered inequitable conduct. If it's intentional, it can invalidate the patent entirely. I know what it is, Ethan said. I know you know. I'm saying it so we're both working from the same language. She turned a page in her portfolio. My IP attorney reviewed the published paper from your Michigan archive last night. She says the methodology overlap between the 2017 paper and the 2018 patent is, quote, not subtle. She slid a printed document across the table, a page of side-by-side comparisons, highlighted passages, margin notes in red ink. She also said that if you have time-stamped notebooks showing your individual development of the core logic, that's a significant evidentiary foundation. Ethan looked at the comparison page. He didn't need to read it carefully. He'd lived the original. He knew what the overlap looked like. But seeing it laid out clinically, in red ink, by someone who had no prior investment in the story, did something to him that he hadn't quite expected. It made it real in a different way. Not the way it was real when it was his private wound, his private history. Real in the way that a court document is real. Evidence real. He pulled one of the notebooks toward him and opened it. The date on the first page was February 2016, a full year and a half before the patent was filed. His handwriting covered every page, tight and technical, working through problems in real time, the marginalia of someone genuinely thinking rather than documenting after the fact. These go from February 2016 to November 2017, he said. That's the full development period. The rolling vibration threshold analysis is in here from April 2016. The dual bus verification sequence is from September. He turned to a page near the back. This is a draft patent claim I wrote in October 2017. Brandon and I had agreed we were going to file together. He took this draft. He said he was going to clean it up and send it to the patent attorney. He laid the notebook flat on the table. The filing happened in February 2018. I was not on it. Sophia looked at the page, then at him. Did you confront him? I tried. He said it simply, without drama, because the drama had long since burned off, and what was left was just the flat fact of it. He said there'd been a miscommunication with the attorney. He said he'd file a correction. Then he stopped returning my calls. He paused. His company launched 6 months later. He had investors, he had a product roadmap, and I had notebooks in a cardboard box. You didn't pursue legal action. I was 26 years old with a baby and no money. Intellectual property litigation against a well-funded startup can cost $500,000 and take 5 years. I didn't have $5,000. He looked at the table. By the time Noah was old enough that I'd have had some bandwidth to think about it again, Aerosynth was a real company with real contracts and real lawyers, and I was a one-man aircraft repair shop in New Jersey. He met her eyes. I made a calculation. I told myself it was about protecting my kids' stability. Maybe it was. Maybe I just got tired. Sophia was quiet. She was looking at him with an expression that was hard to read. Not pity, he didn't think. Something more complicated, like she was processing multiple things at once and hadn't finished yet. There's something else you should know, she said. The National Aerospace Innovation Award. The one Brandon is receiving in 11 days. It's specifically being given for the Aeroscan diagnostic system. The selection committee cited the patent. His acceptance of that award, with his current patent status, I know what it means, Ethan said quietly. If we can establish legitimate co-inventorship, the award committee would have to... I said I know what it means. He said it without heat, but firmly. I've known what it meant since the day he filed without my name. I just had other things to deal with. Another silence, this one different from the others. Something had shifted in the room. Some temperature change, some rebalancing of weight. Sophia set her pen down on the portfolio. Why did you put the footnote in the service report? She asked. He hadn't expected that question. What? The footnote, citing the Walker and Pierce paper. You put it in a service report to a client. You didn't have to. It was a footnote. Nobody reads footnotes. She was watching him carefully. Why put it in? He thought about it honestly. He wasn't sure he had a clean answer. Habit, he said finally. When my work touches something I had a hand in building, I cite it. It's what you do in engineering. You document, you attribute, you... He stopped. I couldn't put my name on the patent, but I could put my name on the footnote. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked her pen back up. Okay, she said. Here's what I can offer. I can put my legal team on this. Real IP litigation attorneys, not corporate generalists. I can cover the cost. My company has standing because of the licensing agreement, so we have legitimate legal interest in establishing the correct inventorship. I can also bring in an independent technical expert to review the notebooks against the patent filing. She paused. I can't promise you an outcome. I can't promise the timeline, and I can't promise that this doesn't get complicated and ugly before it gets resolved. Why would you do this? Ethan asked. Your company's interest here is in the licensing agreement. If the patent gets invalidated, your agreement goes away too. You could just as easily, more easily, build a legal argument that you were an innocent party in a licensing transaction and move on. I could, she said. So why aren't you? She was quiet for a moment. It wasn't a calculating quiet. It was the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be and landing on completely. Because I spent a lot of years in rooms full of people who had the resources to make things right and chose not to, she said. Because I looked at your invoice and then I looked at that footnote, and the only reason a person puts their name in a footnote on a service report that nobody's going to read is because it's the only place they have left to put it. She closed her portfolio. And because I have a company that apparently has been paying royalties for 7 years on work that someone else did. That offends me. He looked at her across the table in the hangar office, in the bad fluorescent light beside the cold coffee machine, and he thought that this was not the version of this conversation he had ever imagined having. In the versions he'd imagined, and over the years he'd imagined a few, the person sitting across from him had always been a lawyer, or a judge, or some neutral institutional authority, not a CEO in dark jeans who'd driven herself to a small aircraft hangar in New Jersey and asked a question about a footnote. You'd be going against Brandon Pierce, he said. He has the same kind of resources you do. He has contracts with government programs. He's not going to... I know who he is. Her voice was even. I've been in rooms with Brandon Pierce. He spoke at an industry conference I hosted 14 months ago. She paused. He's charming. He told a story about building his company from nothing. He talked about sleepless nights and breakthroughs and how the technology came to him. Something moved across her face, brief but visible. I applauded. I gave him 20 minutes on my stage. She picked up her portfolio. I'd like to not have done that, in retrospect. Ethan didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say to that. Can I take photographs of the notebooks? She asked. I'll leave the originals with you. My team will need the images to start the analysis. He nodded. She took her phone out and went through every page methodically, carefully, the way she did everything, thorough, deliberate, not missing anything. It took about 40 minutes. Neither of them talked much during it. There wasn't an awkwardness to the silence, just a kind of shared focus. Something was being started here, and they were both aware of it. When she finished, she stood up and put her phone in her jacket pocket. There's one more thing, she said. I had my investigator pull your professional history when I was reviewing the service report. Before I called you today. She said it straightforwardly, without apology, because she wasn't the kind of person who apologized for doing her homework. 6 years ago, when you left Michigan and started Walker Aviation, you had a business partner, Marcus Webb. The partnership dissolved in 18 months. Ethan felt a small tightness in his jaw. That's correct? What happened? That's not related to the patent. I'm not suggesting it is. I'm asking because I want to understand the full picture before I commit my resources to this. She held his gaze. I'm not going to find something later that changes the shape of the story in a way I didn't expect. He looked at her. The tightness eased, replaced by something more like reluctant respect. She was right to ask. He would have asked the same thing. Marcus and I had a disagreement about how to structure the business. He wanted to expand fast, take on investors, grow the shop into something regional. I wanted to stay small, stay independent, focus on quality. He paused. I had Noah. I couldn't afford a failed expansion. We disagreed. We dissolved the partnership. He took his capital and started his own shop in Pennsylvania. We haven't talked since. He met her eyes. That's the whole story. She held his gaze for another beat, then nodded once. All right. She picked up her portfolio. I'll have my attorney reach out to you on Monday. Her name is Diane Eng. She's very good. She'll explain what the process looks like and what she'll need from you. She started toward the hangar door, then stopped. Ethan. He looked up. The diagnostic system you built. The methodology in those notebooks. She tilted her head slightly. It's genuinely good. I had my technical team look at the Aeroscan product. The core logic you described to me on the phone, what it can do, the intermittent fault detection, the rolling vibration threshold analysis. It's elegant. It's the kind of thing that takes a real understanding of the underlying physics. She paused. Brandon Pierce is a good businessman. He's not the engineer who designed that. Ethan didn't answer. I just wanted to say that, she said. Someone should have said it sooner. She walked out into the afternoon. He sat at the table for a moment after she left, listening to the sound of her rental car pulling out of the gravel lot. His hand was resting on the cover of the notebook, and he noticed, almost with surprise, that his hand was slightly unsteady. He pressed it flat against the cover. The notebook was warm from the light. The spiral binding was bent at the corner from years of being stacked wrong in a box. His initials were written in black marker on the cover, the way he'd labeled everything in graduate school, because lab notebooks got mixed up and lost and borrowed and never returned, and you learned quickly to put your name on things. He sat there for a while longer. Then he got up, put the notebooks back in order, and went back to work on the Beechcraft. He had 4 hours before he needed to pick up Noah. But something was different now, Seth. Something in the specific weight of the afternoon, in the quality of the silence in the hangar, in the way the light fell through the high windows onto the concrete floor. The cardboard box had been opened. The notebooks had been on a table. Someone with real power and real resources had sat across from him and read the footnote and understood what it meant. He didn't know yet what that would become. But something had started. And after 6 years of nothing starting, something was something. He picked up his wrench. He went back to work. Across the state, in a glass and steel office building in Midtown Manhattan that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year, Brandon Pierce was on his third meeting of the afternoon when his phone buzzed with a message from his attorney. He glanced at it under the conference table, the way you do when you're trying to look like you're not looking at your phone. The message was 4 words long. We need to talk. Brandon Pierce set his phone face down on his knee and returned his attention to the meeting, and his expression did not change because he was very good at that. He'd spent years getting very good at that. But under the table, his thumb pressed against the edge of his phone case hard enough that it left a mark on the skin. He knew, in the particular way that a person knows a thing they've been half expecting for a very long time, that something had shifted. He didn't know the specifics yet. He didn't know about the hotel room, or the notebooks, or the footnote, or the woman in the charcoal blazer who had started asking questions. But he knew that the thing he had built his life on top of had always had a crack in it, and somewhere, in some place he couldn't see yet, the vibration had started. Diane Ung called on Monday morning at 8:47, which told Ethan two things: that she was a morning person, and that Sophia Bennett had not been exaggerating about her. She had a voice that was brisk without being cold, the voice of someone who had learned to move fast because time was always the resource in shortest supply. She introduced herself, confirmed she'd reviewed the photographs of the notebooks and the comparative analysis her team had done over the weekend, and then said, without any softening preamble, "I want to be honest with you about where we are and what this is going to take." "Go ahead," Ethan said. He was in the hangar office, door closed, coffee in hand. Noah already dropped at school. "The evidentiary foundation you have is strong. Stronger than I expected, honestly. The notebooks are time-stamped, they're in your handwriting, and the progression of the methodology is clearly documented from early development through to a draft patent claim. The Walker and Pierce paper from Michigan provides independent corroboration that you were a co-developer. And the overlap between your documented work and the issued patent is... There's no innocent explanation for how specific it is." She paused. "Here's what that means in practical terms. We have enough to file a request with the USPTO for correction of inventorship under 35 U.S.C. 256. That's the formal mechanism for adding an omitted co-inventor to an issued patent. It doesn't require proving fraud at the outset. We just need to establish that you made a significant contribution to the conception of the invention. And if Brandon contests it, he will contest it. His attorneys will contest it aggressively, because if the correction goes through, it affects the ownership structure of every claim in that patent, and by extension, every licensing agreement Aerosynth has ever signed." A brief pause. "That's a lot of money. He's not going to let that go without a fight." Ethan stared at the wall of the office, at Noah's drawing of an airplane that had been taped there for 2 years. Crayon, slightly lopsided, the engine's too big and the wings too short in the way that a kid's drawing is more about enthusiasm than accuracy. What does the fight look like? Depositions, expert witnesses, technical analysis? It's not criminal. This is civil patent law, but it's adversarial and it's slow. Best case, 18 months. More likely 2 to 3 years if he pushes it all the way. She said it plainly, without apology. "I'm telling you this because you need to know what you're signing up for. This is not a quick resolution." "What about the award ceremony?" 11 days. "The award is a separate track. I've been in contact with the National Aerospace Innovation Foundation's General Counsel. They have their own standards for vetting award recipients, and they take credential fraud seriously. If we can get them documentation, the notebooks, the paper, the patent analysis, before the ceremony, they have the discretion to suspend or withhold the award pending investigation." She paused. "I can't promise they will, but I can make sure they have what they need to make an informed decision." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about the 2 to 3 years. He was thinking about what that meant practically, not just emotionally, not just in terms of the story, but in terms of what it would cost him in time and energy and distraction, what it would do to the careful equilibrium of the life he'd built around Noah's school schedule and the hangar lease and the steady, modest rhythm of work that kept them both stable. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course." No pressure in her voice. "Take a few days, but I'd ask you not to take more than that because if we're going to get anything in front of the foundation before the ceremony, we're already working against the clock." He thanked her and hung up. He sat in the office for a long time after that, looking at the crayon airplane on the wall. He didn't tell Noah that night. He wasn't sure yet what he would tell him, or when, or how much a 9-year-old needed to know about a patent dispute and a stolen name and a fight that might take 3 years to resolve. He made dinner. Actual chicken this time, not spaghetti from a jar. And they ate and talked about Noah's day and about a kid in his class named Jordan who had apparently eaten an entire granola bar in one bite on a dare and immediately regretted it, which was the kind of story Noah told with the full narrative commitment of a born storyteller. After dinner, while Noah was doing homework at the kitchen table, Ethan went to the garage and opened the storage box again. He'd put the notebooks back after Sophia left, but there was another layer to the box. Older things, further down. He dug through it carefully. Old journals, a Michigan sweatshirt he never wore anymore, a photograph from the lab, him and Brandon at 23, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations, both of them grinning like they owned the future. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Brandon looked the same in it as he did in the Forbes profile Ethan had found online. Same broad smile, same easy confidence, the particular warmth of a person who was very good at making you feel like you were the most interesting thing in the room. Ethan remembered the specific quality of that warmth, how it had felt, at 23, to be on the receiving end of it. How it had made him want to work harder, build better, produce something worth that confidence. He put the photograph face down in the box. Under it, he found what he'd been looking for. A printed email chain, 17 pages long, from October and November 2017. He and Brandon going back and forth about the patent draft. Brandon's messages were enthusiastic, encouraging, full of exclamation points and phrases like this is going to change everything, and once we file, we'll have the whole thing locked down. Ethan's messages were more measured. Technical questions, specific edits, a careful conversation about which claims to prioritize. The last email from Brandon, dated November 14, 2017, said, "I've got a meeting with the patent attorney next week. I'll take the draft in, clean up the language, and we'll be good to go. You'll have the filing confirmation by end of December." Ethan had replied, "Sounds good. Let me know if they need anything from me." Brandon's filing had happened in February 2018. Ethan had never received a filing confirmation. He sat on the cold garage floor with the email chain in his hands and thought about the specific mechanics of how a betrayal that large happens, not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small, quiet decisions. An email not sent, a name not added, a phone not answered, the accumulation of ordinary-seeming omissions that added up eventually to a theft. He folded the email chain and put it in a separate folder. Then he went back inside, checked Noah's homework, and called Diane Ng's office to leave a message that he was ready to move forward. The first response from Brandon's legal team came 4 days later, faster than Diane had expected, which itself told a story. She called Ethan on a Thursday afternoon while he was doing an engine inspection on a Piper Cherokee. "They've made a pre-litigation settlement offer," she said. "I'm going to read you the key terms, and I want you to listen to all of them before you respond." He put down his wrench. "Go ahead." Aerosynth Diagnostics, through their legal representation, is offering a one-time payment of $350,000 in exchange for a full release of any co-inventorship claims, a non-disclosure agreement covering all aspects of the dispute, and a statement from you confirming that the patent accurately reflects the sole inventorship of Brandon Pierce. A pause. They also want you to sign a separate agreement stating that you will not contact any media, any industry organizations, or any regulatory bodies regarding this matter. Ethan said nothing. "Ethan, I heard you. $350,000 is not nothing for someone in your position, for someone in my position," he said slowly. $350,000 is the price they've calculated it takes to make me go away. His voice was even. "They want me to sign a statement saying his name belongs on that patent. Yes. That's not money. That's a price for a lie." Diane was quiet for a moment. "I know. I'm not recommending you take it. I'm required to present it to you fully. But I want you to understand what you're declining. It's not just the money. If you decline, they escalate. They have a legal team that does nothing but patent litigation. They have resources that will make this process expensive and exhausting in ways that—" "Diane." He picked his wrench back up, not to use it, just to have something in his hand. "Did you read those notebooks?" "I did." "All 3 of them?" "Every page." "Then you know that patent belongs to both of us." Probably more to me than to him. He paused. I have a son. He's 9 years old. He doesn't know any of this yet. But one day he's going to be old enough to look up his father's name and find out what his father built. And I need what he finds to be the truth. His grip tightened on the wrench. I'm not signing a statement that says otherwise for $350,000 or $350 million. Tell them no. Diane was quiet for exactly one beat. All right, she said, and he could hear something in her voice. Not exactly admiration, but something close to it. The sound of a lawyer who had just confirmed that her client was going to make her job harder and had made peace with it. I'll tell them no. Sophia flew in the following Tuesday for what she called a strategy meeting, which turned out to be less formal than that phrase suggested. She arrived at the hangar in the mid-afternoon, again in the rental car, again alone, and this time she'd brought sandwiches, which Ethan hadn't expected and which struck him irrationally as the most human thing she'd done yet. My assistant tried to book a conference room at a hotel near the airport, she said, setting the bag on the workbench. I told her not to bother. You could have done this by phone. I could have. She sat on a stool and opened her portfolio. Diane told me you turned down the offer. She told you fast. I asked her to keep me informed. She met his eyes. You're not her only client in this, remember. My company is a party to this dispute, too. I remember. He sat across from her on another stool. Do you have a problem with me declining? No, I'm telling you because I want you to know that my team's position is fully aligned with yours. We're not looking for a quiet resolution. We want the record corrected. She opened the portfolio. Here's where things stand. Diane has submitted the inventorship correction request to the USPTO. They've acknowledged receipt. Their review timeline is typically 60 to 90 days, but we flagged the award ceremony timeline and requested expedited handling. We'll see if that gets traction. She turned a page. On the foundation side, their general counsel has received our documentation package. They have not responded formally yet, but I had an off-the-record conversation with a board member I know personally. They're taking it seriously. The fact that it came from me with a formal legal brief attached, rather than from an anonymous source, that matters to them. Brandon will find out about the foundation inquiry. He probably already has. His attorneys would have eyes on the foundation. She paused. Which means the next offer isn't going to be $350,000. She was right about that. The second offer came the following Thursday. $750,000 with the same NDA, the same false statement requirement, and 2 new additions, a clause requiring Ethan to return all notebooks and documentation to Aerosynth, and a clause requiring him to submit to a sworn statement that he had never developed any significant portion of the Aeroscan methodology. Diane read it to him over the phone. When she finished, he said, "They want the notebooks." "Yes." "The one physical thing I have that they can't rewrite or reframe or explain away. They want me to hand it to them." "That's the interpretation, yes." "No," he said. Same answer as before. He hung up and sat in his truck in the school parking lot and waited for Noah. That night, after dinner, while Noah was watching television in the living room, Ethan took the notebooks out of the garage box and put them in the locked filing cabinet in his bedroom, the one he used for legal documents, and the copy of his custody agreement and Noah's birth certificate. The things that mattered most. He hadn't told Noah yet. He'd been trying to figure out the right way to do it, the right amount to share with a 9-year-old who was perceptive enough that vague reassurances wouldn't work, but young enough that the full weight of it would be unfair to put on him. He'd been putting it off. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the locked cabinet and thought that putting it off was starting to become its own problem. Noah was going to notice that his father was distracted, that there were phone calls behind closed doors, that something was moving in the background of their daily life that nobody was naming. He went back out to the living room. "Hey," he said. Noah looked up from the television, reading something in his father's face immediately, the way kids do when they've been paying attention their whole lives to the adult who raised them. He muted the TV without being asked. "What?" Noah said. Ethan sat in the armchair across from the couch. "There's something going on that I want to tell you about. It's complicated, but you're old enough to hear it." Noah put the remote down on the cushion beside him. He was giving Ethan the full, serious attention of a kid who had learned that his father didn't use that tone of voice unless something was real. "You know how I used to do engineering before I had the hangar?" Ethan began. Noah nodded. "A long time ago, before you were born, I was working on something important, a system for aircraft, something that could find problems in planes that were hard to find any other way." He paused, choosing his words. "I worked on it for a couple of years. It was probably the best technical work I've ever done." "What happened to it?" "A person I trusted took it. He filed the legal paperwork with his name on it instead of mine. His company got rich from it." He watched Noah's face. "And I didn't have the money or the time to fight it back then. So I let it go." Noah was quiet for a moment. His expression was working through something. Not confusion, Ethan could tell, but a kind of careful processing. Like he was deciding how to respond to something that deserved a real response. "He stole it," Noah said. "Essentially, yes." "Are you going to get it back?" "I'm trying to." "How?" "A lawyer, and someone who has resources I don't." He paused. "Her name is Sophia Bennett. She's the woman with the Gulf Stream." Noah was quiet again. Then, "Is it dangerous?" Ethan blinked. He hadn't expected that. "No, it's not dangerous. It's legal. It's going to be complicated, and it might take a while, and I wanted you to know about it because you're going to notice that things are different for a while." He looked at his son. "And because it involves your name too, our name. I want to make sure the record says the right thing, so when you're older and you look it up, it's right." Noah sat with that for a long moment. The television played silently behind him, some nature program, footage of birds over a coastline. "Dad," Noah said. "Yeah." "Why didn't you fight it before?" It was the question Ethan had been asking himself in various forms for 6 years. He told himself it was money, time, resources. He told himself it was stability, Noah's needs, pragmatism. All of those things were true. But sitting here in the living room with his 9-year-old looking at him with those serious dark eyes, he found he didn't want to give the practical answer. "I was tired," he said, "and I was scared. Not of him, exactly. More scared of losing. Of fighting and still losing. If you fight and win, you get something back. If you fight and lose, you've used up everything you had, and you're still empty-handed." He held his son's gaze. "I had you to take care of. I didn't want to gamble with that." Noah was quiet for a few seconds. "But you're fighting now." "Yes." "Because of the Gulfstream lady?" "Because someone found the evidence and pointed it at me and told me the truth still mattered. And because—" He stopped. Started again. "Because you're old enough now that I can fight without it being at your expense. And because you deserve to know the truth about what your father built." Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked the remote back up, unmuted the TV, and said, "You should win." Ethan almost laughed. "I appreciate the vote of confidence." "I mean it. You should win." Noah turned back to the screen, but his posture had changed. Something settled in it, like a decision had been made. "I'll look it up when I'm older. I want it to be right." The investigation was not clean or quick or particularly dignified. Diane had warned him about that, and she'd been accurate. Over the following 3 weeks, it spread into territory that Ethan hadn't fully anticipated. The technical expert Diane brought in was a professor named Dr. Sandra Okafor from Caltech, who specialized in avionics systems and patent analysis, and who had testified in 12 previous intellectual property cases. She spent 4 days with the notebooks and the patent documentation before delivering a report that was 43 pages long and methodologically airtight. Her conclusion, summarized in the report's first paragraph, was that the core inventive concepts described in the patent, specifically the rolling vibration threshold analysis and the dual bus fault verification sequence, were documented in Ethan Walker's notebooks a minimum of 18 months before the patent's filing date, and were not present in any documented work attributable to Brandon Pierce prior to their collaboration. In plainer English, Brandon Pierce had not invented what the patent said he invented. Not alone. Possibly not at all. Sophia called Ethan the night Diane forwarded him the report. He was in the hangar, working late. the overhead lights casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "Have you read Okafor's report?" she asked. "3 times. It's thorough. It's definitive." He set the report down on the workbench. "The question is whether definitive means anything to the people who decide these things. It means something to the Foundation." Her voice had an edge to it. Not anger exactly, but the particular tension of someone who had been managing a situation carefully and was watching it accelerate. Their general counsel called Carol today. They're convening an emergency review of Brandon's nomination. They won't tell us the outcome before the ceremony, but the fact that they're convening an emergency review 3 days before the event means they're worried. "Means they're worried," she agreed. In his Midtown office, Brandon Pierce was, by all accounts, not sleeping well. His assistant had canceled 2 client meetings that week. His attorneys had been in and out of his building with the frequency of people trying to contain something that kept spreading. The Forbes profile that had run the previous month had been quietly removed from Aerosynth's website. He had not tried to call Ethan, but one of his attorneys had reached out to Diane on a Friday afternoon with what was framed as an informal conversation about a potential restructured arrangement, language that translated, in Diane's experience, to, "We know the first 2 offers failed and we want to try a different approach." Diane had relayed the substance of the call to Ethan over the weekend. They're proposing a co-inventorship acknowledgement without the false statement requirement. They'd amend the patent to add your name. In exchange, you'd agree not to seek damages or licensing recalculations. "They want to add my name quietly," Ethan said. "No publicity, no acknowledgement of what happened, just a technical correction buried in a USPTO filing that nobody reads." That's the shape of it. And the award? No mention of the award in their offer. He was in the kitchen when this call came. Noah was at school. The overhead light was still flickering. He'd bought the replacement bulb and kept forgetting to actually change it, and the intermittent flicker had become such a fixture of the kitchen that he'd started not noticing it, the way you stop noticing a sound once you've classified it as background noise. "No," he said. "Ethan, they want to give me my name back in a document no one will see, and they want to keep the award and keep the company's public story intact. That's not a correction. That's a burial with a nicer coffin." His voice was flat. "I want the official record corrected in full. I want the award process to reflect accurate information. I want the industry to know what was built and who built it." A pause. "That's what I want. Not money, not a quiet amendment. The truth on record." Diane was quiet for a moment. "That position makes the litigation longer and harder." "I know." "Brandon's team will take this personally now. They'll push back on every element of the documentation. They'll try to find inconsistencies in the notebooks. Let them try." He said it with a steadiness that surprised even him. "I know what's in those notebooks. I know what I built. They can look at every page." "All right." A pause. "There's one other thing. Brandon's attorneys have started making inquiries about your personal history, your ex-wife, the custody arrangement, the dissolved partnership with Marcus Webb. They're looking for leverage. Anything they can use to question your character or your credibility." He'd expected this. Diane had warned him it was coming. "There's nothing to find." "I know. I've looked. But be prepared for them to try to make something out of nothing." A pause. "How are you doing?" "Not legally, actually." The question caught him slightly off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because people didn't usually ask it directly. He looked at the flickering light above the kitchen table. "I'm okay," he said. Then more honestly, "I'm tired. It's a lot to carry alongside regular life. But I'm okay." "That's all you need to be," Diane said, and for the first time in their professional relationship, her voice had something in it that wasn't quite lawyerly, just human. "That's enough. Ukat." The award ceremony was 4 days away when Sophia called with news that changed the shape of everything. Ethan was picking up Noah from school when his phone rang. He answered it hands-free as he pulled out of the parking lot, Noah in the back seat with his backpack still on, earbuds in. "The foundation called," Sophia said without preamble. "Officially. They've suspended Brandon's award nomination pending a formal investigation into the patent's inventorship." He said nothing. He kept driving. The suspension was announced internally to the ceremony committee this afternoon. It'll be public by tomorrow morning. Their statement says the award has been suspended due to new information regarding the nominated work, and that an independent review will determine whether the nomination should be reinstated, withdrawn, or reconsidered. A pause. Their general counsel specifically mentioned the Okafor report as the triggering document. "He'll fight it," Ethan said quietly. "Of course he will." His attorneys released a statement within the hour calling it politically motivated and claiming there's no merit to the allegations. They're filing an injunction to try to force the foundation to reinstate the nomination before the ceremony. A pause. The injunction won't succeed. Foundation award decisions are discretionary and not subject to judicial oversight, but they'll file it anyway because filing it generates news. Noah had taken out one earbud. He was looking at the back of his father's head with the careful attention of a kid reading a situation he'd been told about. "Dad," Noah said quietly. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. "I'm on the phone, buddy." "I know. Is it the thing?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah." Noah put his earbud back in and looked out the window, but the set of his shoulders was different. A little straighter, Ethan thought, like someone bracing for something they'd decided they were ready for. "Ethan," Sophia said, "the foundation suspension doesn't resolve the patent question. That's still going to take time. But it means that in 4 days, at that ceremony, in front of every major figure in the aerospace industry, the award that was going to be given to Brandon Pierce for work he didn't do alone is not going to be given." She paused. "That's not the end of it, but it's the first time the truth has been loud enough that the room has to stop and listen." He turned onto his street. The afternoon light was long and flat, the kind of autumn light that makes ordinary things look significant. "Is it enough?" he asked. "For now? Is it enough to make the rest of the process possible?" "It makes the rest of the process visible," she said, "which is a start." He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine running. "Sophia." "Yes." "Thank you for the footnote thing." He paused, aware of how that sounded. "For reading it." A brief silence. "Get some rest," she said. "The next few days are going to be loud." She hung up. Noah had gotten out of the car and was standing on the front walk with his backpack, looking back through the windshield at his father with an expression that asked, without words, what just happened. Ethan got out of the car. He stood on the driveway in the long autumn light and looked at his son. "The award," he said. "The one they were going to give him. They've suspended it." Noah processed this. "Because of your notebooks?" "Partly, because of a lot of things." "Is that good?" "It's the beginning of good." He nodded toward the house. "Come on, I'll make dinner." "Is it going to be spaghetti?" "Probably." Noah made a face that was performatively disappointed but actually fine with it, and they went inside. In his midtown office, 12 floors up and 40 miles away, Brandon Pierce was on the phone with his lead attorney, and his voice, usually controlled, usually warm, usually the practiced instrument of a man who had spent years knowing exactly what effect his words would have, was none of those things. It was just scared. And in that glass and steel building where he had built a career on someone else's foundation, the crack that had always been there was finally running from floor to ceiling. The news broke on a Wednesday morning, the way bad news usually does, not with any particular drama, just a press release and a timestamp and the quiet mechanical spread of information across industry newsletters and LinkedIn feeds and the inboxes of people who cared about such things. The National Aerospace Innovation Foundation's statement was 14 sentences long. It confirmed the suspension of the award nomination, cited newly submitted documentation regarding the inventive process underlying the nominated technology, and stated that an independent panel had been convened to review the matter. It did not name Ethan Walker. It did not name Brandon Pierce, except in the context of the nomination itself. It was careful and institutional and said, between every line, that something was wrong without fully committing to what that something was. By 9 in the morning, Ethan's phone had received 11 calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He sent all of them to voicemail. 3 were journalists. 2 were from people who identified themselves as former colleagues of Brandon's who wanted to talk. 1 was from a man who said he'd worked at Aerosynth's early development team and had information that might be relevant, which was the kind of message that could mean anything from genuine whistleblower to opportunist attaching himself to a moving story. He forwarded that one to Diane. He went to work on a turbine inspection that had been scheduled for 2 weeks and tried to concentrate on the specific physical reality of the engine in front of him, the thing he could see and measure and trust, rather than the noise building in his peripheral awareness. He wasn't good at ignoring noise. He was better at it than he used to be, but he'd never been the kind of person who could fully compartmentalize, and the attempt to do it always cost him something. Diane called at 10:30. "The injunction failed," she said. "Federal judge dismissed it this morning. The foundation has full discretion over its award decisions, and Brandon's attorneys knew that going in, the filing was a pressure tactic, not a real legal argument." She paused. "The ceremony is in 2 days." "I know." Brandon's PR team released a statement an hour ago. They're calling the suspension a coordinated attack by a competitor, implying Sophia Bennett orchestrated it to eliminate Aerosynth from the marketplace. Ethan set down his wrench. They're going after Sophia. They're trying to reframe the story, make it about corporate competition rather than patent fraud. It's a standard move. When you can't defend the substance, attack the motive. A pause. Sophia's communications team is handling it. She's not worried. She should be a little worried. She says she isn't, and I've learned to take her at her word on that. Diane's voice had a dry edge that Ethan had come to recognize as her version of humor. There's something else. The former Aerosynth employee who left you that voicemail, I called him. His name is Ray Cortez. He was an early engineer at Aerosynth, came on in the first year. He says he saw internal documentation during the company's setup phase that listed you as a co-inventor. The documents were later revised. He kept a copy. Ethan stood very still in the hangar. Outside, a small plane was taxiing somewhere nearby, the engine sound rising and falling. He kept a copy. He says he kept it because something felt wrong at the time and he didn't know what to do with it. He's been carrying it for 6 years. A pause. He's willing to provide it under oath. There was a specific feeling that came with that information, not elation, because Ethan had trained himself to be careful with anything that felt like victory before it was finished. But something adjacent to relief. The relief of finding out that the thing you knew to be true had a witness who knew it too, that you hadn't been alone in the room when it happened. "Get him in front of Diane," Ethan said, already scheduled for tomorrow morning. Well, he told Sophia about Ray Cortez that evening. She was in Manhattan by then. She'd come in for the ceremony, which was happening whether Brandon received an award or not, because the aerospace industry's annual gala was a separate event from the award presentation itself, and because Sophia had obligations there that predated all of this. She called him at 7:30 when Noah was in bed and the house was quiet. "Diane told me about Cortez," she said. "That's significant." "It put someone else in the room," Ethan said. "Someone who saw it from inside Aerosynth. His testimony combined with the notebooks and the Okafor report." She stopped. "This is becoming a case that's very hard to walk back from." "That's what I want." "I know." A pause. "Are you coming to the ceremony?" He hadn't expected the question. "What?" "The gala, tomorrow night. You're not required to. There's no legal reason you need to be there, but I want you to know that you're invited, as my guest." He was quiet for a moment, thinking about what that meant. A room full of aerospace industry executives, journalists, the full weight of the professional world that had been, for 6 years, the backdrop against which Brandon Pierce had built his false legacy. Ethan had been invisible to that world, by choice, partly, by circumstance, mostly. The quiet shop near the regional airport, the one-man operation, the invoice that charged fair prices. "It's not my world," he said. "It could be." "Sophia, I'm not saying it is right now, I'm saying it has a right to be." She paused. "And I think there's value in you being in that room when the announcement holds. Not to make a scene, there won't be one. Just to be present. To exist in that space as yourself, with your name, while the thing that was built on top of your work starts to come apart." He looked across the kitchen at the overhead light, which had finally stopped flickering. He'd replaced the bulb 2 days ago, finally, because Noah had pointed at it and said, "Dad, That's been broken forever with enough patient exasperation that Ethan had gotten up and fixed it within the hour. The kitchen looked different without the flicker, more stable somehow, more like itself. "All right," he said. "Good." A pause. "Wear something that isn't a work jacket." "I'll do my best." He heard something that might have been a smile in her voice before she hung up. The Meridian Grand was a hotel in Midtown Manhattan that occupied a full city block and had been hosting industry events since before most of the people attending had been born. Its ballroom could seat 800. On the night of the National Aerospace Innovation Gala, it was seating 743, which was close enough to capacity that the room had the particular density of sound and heat and human proximity that made everything feel slightly more significant than it might have in a half-empty space. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late because the train from New Jersey had run on a delay that the MTA had communicated to him via a single cryptic notification on his phone, and because he'd spent longer than planned trying to find a shirt that didn't look like something he'd wear to a maintenance inspection. He'd settled on a dark navy shirt and the one blazer he owned, which he'd bought 3 years ago for a custody mediation hearing and had worn 4 times total. He found Sophia near the entrance to the ballroom with a glass of water in one hand and her phone in the other, talking to a man in an expensive suit who appeared to be telling her something she already knew. She spotted Ethan across the lobby and said something brief to the man, who moved away, and she crossed to where Ethan was standing. "You made it," she said. "Train was late." She looked him over once, not appraisingly, just noting the context. "How are you doing?" "Honestly, uncomfortable." He looked around at the lobby. The chandeliers, the carpet that cost more per yard than his monthly hangar lease, the density of people who moved through spaces like this without thinking about it. "This is not my natural habitat. Mine either, originally." She said it without sentimentality, just as a fact. You learn to move through it without letting it move you. She tilted her head toward the ballroom. "Brandon is here. He arrived 40 minutes ago with 4 people, 2 of whom are attorneys. He came anyway. He was always going to come. Staying away would have been an admission. He's going to sit in that room and let people see him, and his attorneys are going to make noise, and he's hoping the suspension looks like a procedural technicality rather than what it actually is." A pause. "He doesn't know about Ray Cortez yet. Diane filed the supplemental evidence this afternoon. He'll know by tomorrow." They moved into the ballroom together. The space was loud with the specific sound of an industry gathering, the collective voice of a few hundred people who all knew each other and were performing various versions of professional warmth at one another. Ethan followed Sophia to a table near the center of the room, where Carol Reyes and 2 others from Bennett Aerospace were already seated. Carol looked at Ethan with the expression of someone who had heard a great deal about him and was now calibrating expectations against reality. She extended her hand. "Carol Reyes, I've read your notebooks." "Good reading?" Ethan said. "Infuriating reading," she said, "in the most useful possible way." He sat down. The table had a view of the stage, the podium, the backdrop with the Foundation's logo, the particular theatrical staging of an event where something important was supposed to happen. Waitstaff moved through the room with practiced efficiency. The noise settled into a comfortable register, and then, across the room, Ethan saw Brandon Pierce for the first time in 6 years. He was at a table near the stage, center front, the table that would have been reserved for the award recipient. He looked the same as the Forbes photograph, the same as the conference panel, the same as the man who had stood beside a whiteboard at 23 and grinned like the future was a certainty. He was talking to the man beside him with the full engagement of someone performing normalcy, but his posture had something in it that hadn't been in the photographs. A slight rigidity in the shoulders, a quality of attention that was pointed in too many directions at once. He was watching the room. He hadn't seen Ethan yet. Sophia touched Ethan's arm lightly. "Breathe," she said quietly. "I'm breathing. You look like someone who's about to do something they'll regret." "I'm not going to do anything." He looked away from Brandon, back to the table. He stopped. "I haven't been in the same room as him in 6 years." "I know. He looks exactly the same." "People like that usually do," she said. "Right up until they don't." The program began at 8. The foundation's chairman gave an opening address about innovation and excellence and the industry's forward momentum, which was the kind of speech that was designed to be heard without being listened to. Awards in several minor categories were presented with the usual ceremony: plaques and applause and brief speeches about gratitude and teams and the collaborative nature of engineering progress, the last of which landed in Ethan's chest with a specific weight that he managed to keep off his face. The Innovation Award was the final category of the evening. Ethan knew it was coming when the chairman returned to the podium with a slightly different energy, more deliberate, more careful, the energy of someone who was about to say something that the room didn't entirely expect. The National Aerospace Innovation Award, the chairman began, represents the highest recognition our foundation can offer. It is given not merely for technical achievement, but for the integrity of that achievement, for work that advances our industry and reflects the values on which this foundation was built. The room was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of an audience waiting for the next moment, but a different kind, a listening quiet, the kind that happens when people have heard enough about something to know that the next sentence matters. This year's award in the Diagnostic Systems category has been suspended pending an independent review of the nominated work's inventive origins. The chairman said it evenly, without drama, reading directly from the prepared statement. The Foundation's board has determined that new information requires a thorough examination before any recognition can be responsibly conferred. We are committed to ensuring that the awards presented under this foundation's name accurately reflect true authorship and genuine contribution. The room did not erupt. It didn't go loud. It did something in some ways more significant. It went very still for about 4 full seconds, the specific stillness of 700 people simultaneously processing something and not yet deciding how to respond to it. Then the murmur started, low and wide, moving through the room like a change in air pressure. Ethan did not look at Brandon's table. He kept his eyes on the podium, on the chairman, on the foundation's logo behind the stage, on the specific and unambiguous public fact of what had just happened. It was not a victory. He knew that. The patent review was still ongoing. The litigation was still ahead of him. Ray Cortez's testimony still needed to be formalized. The evidence still needed to work through the official processes, and all of that would take months, possibly years, and would cost more energy than he could fully account for right now. But something had happened in this room tonight that couldn't be undone. The award that had been built on his work had not been given. In front of every significant figure in the aerospace industry, in the most visible venue the field had, a line had been drawn. The question had been asked publicly. And questions asked publicly, Ethan had learned, had a momentum of their own. He felt Sophia's attention on him from across the table and looked over. She raised her water glass slightly. Not a toast, not a celebration, just an acknowledgement. Something between recognition and respect. He nodded once. Across the room, Brandon Pierce had gone very still. Babbitt. The post-event lobby was the kind of controlled chaos that follows any public disruption at a formal gathering. Clusters of people talking with the animated focus of those who have witnessed something and are trying to figure out what it means. Ethan stayed close to Sophia's perimeter, not because he needed protection, but because navigating a room full of aerospace executives he'd never met, the night his name had been implicitly put into contention for a major industry award, was the kind of social situation for which his specific life had not prepared him. He was standing near the bar with Carol Reyes, who had the gift of making silence comfortable, when he felt a hand on his arm. He turned. Brandon Pierce was standing 2 feet away. He was alone. No attorneys, no assistants. His face had the particular quality of someone who had burned through several different expressions in the last hour and arrived at something rawer than any of them. He looked, Ethan thought, genuinely tired. Not the performed tiredness of someone seeking sympathy, but the real kind. The kind that lives in the eyes and can't be managed. "Ethan," Brandon said. Carol Reyes had gone still beside him. Ethan felt her attention like a change in temperature. "Brandon," Ethan said. An infinite number of things could have come next. 6 years of absence, 6 years of silence, 6 years of the particular damage that a betrayal does when you never get to speak it to the person who committed it. All of that was compressed into the 2 feet of space between them. Brandon looked at him for a moment. I've been watching for you since you came in. I know. I didn't think you'd come. Sophia invited me. Something moved across Brandon's face at that. Not quite pain, but adjacent to it. The recognition that the person who had exposed him had done so from a position of complete legitimacy, and that there was no conspiracy to point to, no bad faith actor to blame, just a woman who read a footnote and followed it to the truth. I want you to know, he started. Don't, Ethan said. Ethan, I need to. I said don't. He kept his voice low. This was not a conversation he wanted the room to have access to. Not here, not tonight. Brandon stopped. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was asking for something. Absolution, maybe, or at least a door. Some gesture that would make the next part of this manageable. Ethan couldn't give him that. He didn't have it to give. My attorney will handle everything that needs to be handled, Ethan said. If you want to make something right, talk to Diane Eng. That's what I have for you. Brandon held his gaze for another few seconds. Then he nodded, a slow single nod that looked like someone accepting a wait, and turned and walked away through the lobby, not back toward his table, but toward the exit. His attorneys caught up with him near the door, falling into step beside him, and they disappeared through the glass doors into the Manhattan night. Carol exhaled beside Ethan. That was handled well, she said quietly. I just didn't want to yell at him in a ballroom. That counts. He found Sophia 10 minutes later near the coat check, collecting her things. She looked at him and read something in his face. He talked to you. Briefly. What did he say? He wanted to say something. I told him to talk to Diane. She studied him for a moment. How do you feel? It was the second time she'd asked him that. Actually asked. The way people sometimes don't. The way he'd learned not to expect. He thought about the question honestly, standing in the lobby of the Meridian Grand in his custody mediation blazer, 12 miles from the hangar, 40 miles from Noah, on the night that the first real public accounting had begun. Like I didn't realize how heavy it was until just now, he said. Not all of it, but some of it. She nodded. She looked like she understood that specifically, like she had some version of that weight in her own history. Come on, she said. I'll get you a cab to Penn Station. They went out into the cold air together, into the noise of midtown Manhattan at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. The streets wet from rain that had come and gone while they were inside. The lights of the city reflecting off everything in the particular way that made New York look, occasionally, like a place where things could actually be resolved. Ethan didn't say much on the walk to the street. Sophia didn't push. She was good at that, at knowing when silence was more useful than conversation, which was rarer than it should have been in people with her kind of energy. A cab pulled up and she opened the door. Diane's filing the full evidentiary package with the USPTO on Monday, she said. The Cortez documentation changes the timeline significantly. I think we might see a preliminary determination faster than the 60 to 90-day estimate. Okay? And the Foundation has confirmed that their independent panel will present its findings publicly. Whatever they determine, they're going to say it out loud. Okay, he said again. He got into the cab and looked back at her through the open door. She was standing on the curb in the cold, her coat collar up, looking back at him with the particular expression she sometimes had, the one he'd been learning to read, the one that sat somewhere between professional and something that hadn't been named yet. Sophia. Yes. Why aerospace? Why is this your industry? She blinked, not thrown by the question, just recalibrating to the shift. My father was a cargo pilot. I spent my childhood in small airports. A pause. Why do you fix planes instead of building them? I like the part where something was broken and then it isn't. He held her gaze. And I'm good at finding what everyone else missed. She looked at him for a beat. Yes, she said, you are. He pulled the door closed. The cab moved into traffic. He watched her through the rear window, standing on the curb, not moving, watching the cab until it turned the corner. He sat back and looked at the city streaming past the windows and felt, underneath everything else, something that had been missing for so long that he'd stopped cataloging its absence. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Not yet. Something quieter than those things. Something that had to do with the fact that he had put his name in a footnote, and someone had read it, and the machinery of truth, slow and imperfect and expensive as it was, had begun to turn. But 3 days later at 7 in the morning, Ethan's phone rang. He was in the kitchen, Noah already at the table eating cereal, the overhead light burning steady and clear. It was Diane. "I have something to tell you," she said, and her voice had something in it that he hadn't heard before. Not exactly excitement, because Diane Eng was not a person who did excitement, but a quality of contained energy, like someone holding something still while it wanted to move. "Tell me," he said. Ray Cortez's documentation includes something we hadn't anticipated. The original internal company record, the one he copied, isn't just a co-inventor listing. It's a board memo from Aerosynth's first year of operation. Brandon Pierce wrote it to his co-founders. In it, he describes the technology's origin, including a pause, deliberate, including a direct reference to Ethan Walker as the primary developer of the detection methodology, and a discussion of why, quote, keeping the filing clean would be in the company's best interests. The kitchen was quiet. Noah was eating cereal, looking at his phone, not paying attention to his father's face. "He wrote it down," Ethan said, "in a company memo, to his own board." Diane paused. "He knew. He always knew. And he documented that he knew because he needed his co-founders to understand the risk they were taking on, so they could make informed decisions." Another pause. People do strange things when they're building something. They want the people around them to know the full picture even when they can't afford to let anyone outside see it. Ethan sat down in a kitchen chair. Noah looked up at the movement, registered something in his father's face, and set his phone down. "Dad?" Ethan held up one finger, 1 minute, and said into the phone, "What does it mean for the case?" "It means that the inventorship correction isn't just supported by your notebooks and an expert report and a corroborating witness. It's supported by the inventor's own written acknowledgement that you were the primary developer." Diane's voice was even and deliberate. "It means that the miscommunication with the attorney explanation is gone. It means that the word fraud is now applicable in a way that it wasn't before." A pause. "It changes the shape of this significantly." "Does Brandon know?" "His attorneys received the supplemental filing 40 minutes ago." Ethan looked across the kitchen table at his son, who was watching him with that patient, serious attention, the dark eyes that saw everything. "Okay," Ethan said. "Thank you, Diane." He hung up. Noah was still watching him. What happened? Ethan set the phone on the table and looked at his kid for a moment. 9 years old, bowl of cereal, the morning light through the window, the steady overhead bulb that wasn't flickering anymore. "Remember when I told you about the person who took something from me and that I was fighting to get it back?" "Yes." "We found something, a document that makes it very hard for him to keep pretending it didn't happen." Noah thought about this. "Did he write it down?" "He wrote it down." Noah was quiet for a moment, then, "That was stupid of him." Ethan almost laughed. "Yeah," he said. "It was." Noah picked his spoon back up. "Good," he said, with the clean finality of someone who had filed the information under resolved and was ready to go back to his cereal. "People shouldn't take things and then pretend they didn't." "No," Ethan said, "they shouldn't." He sat in the kitchen with his son, in the steady light of an ordinary morning that was not, in fact, ordinary at all, and let the weight of the last several weeks settle around him differently than it had before. Not lifted, not gone, but redistributed somehow, carried differently. The way a thing changes when you know, finally and certainly, that the truth you've been holding is not yours alone to carry. Someone else had written it down. Brandon Pierce, in a memo to his own board, had written it down. And that piece of paper, that 7-year-old document in Ray Cortez's filing cabinet, had just made everything that came next not a question of if, but a question of when. Ethan got up and poured himself more coffee. Outside, the morning was cold and clear, and somewhere across the state, in a glass office building that was about to have a very difficult week, the clock on everything Brandon Pierce had built on someone else's foundation was running down. The board memo changed everything, and it changed it faster than anyone had predicted. Diane had said 60 to 90 days for a preliminary USPTO determination. What happened instead was that Brandon Pierce's legal team, faced with a document written in their own client's hand that described Ethan Walker as the primary developer of the core methodology, stopped fighting the inventorship correction and started negotiating the terms of it. The shift happened within 72 hours of the supplemental filing. Ethan learned about it on a Tuesday afternoon when Diane called him in the middle of a routine oil change on a Cessna 182, her voice carrying that same contained energy he'd heard the morning of the Cortez revelation. "They want to talk settlement," she said. "We've done settlement talks," Ethan said. He had grease on his hands and the phone wedged between his ear and shoulder. "Twice. This is different. Before, they were offering money to make you go away. Now they're asking what it would take to resolve the inventorship question without full litigation." A pause. "That's a different conversation. That's a conversation where they know they're going to lose the underlying claim, and they're trying to control how the loss looks. What do they want? They want a consent agreement, rather than a contested USPTO proceeding. Faster, quieter, no public hearing where experts testify about the memo and the notebooks in front of an administrative judge." She paused. "What they want and what they get are two different things. But I need to know what outcome you're actually after before I sit down with them." He set down his wrench and wiped his hands on the rag that was never clean enough. He'd thought about this question for weeks, had been thinking about it in various forms since the first day Sophia sat across from him in the same hangar office and asked him why he'd put the footnote in the service report. "I want the patent corrected," he said. "My name on it as co-inventor. Official, public, permanent. Not an amendment buried in the USPTO database. I want it done in a way that the foundation, the industry, the licensing partners all have to acknowledge. That's achievable. I want the licensing agreements restructured. The royalties that have been paid on work I co-created, I don't need all of it. I'm not trying to bankrupt the company. But there needs to be a retroactive acknowledgement and a going-forward arrangement that reflects actual ownership. Also achievable. What else?" He hesitated. "I want Brandon to make a public statement. Not a legal document, not a press release drafted by attorneys. A statement in his own words that accurately describes what happened." Diane was quiet for a moment. "That one's harder. His attorneys will resist it because it exposes him to further liability. Anything he admits publicly can be used against him in civil proceedings." "I know, I'm not asking for a confession to a crime. I'm asking for an honest account of how the patent came to be filed the way it was." He paused. "People in this industry have been told a story for 7 years. I want them to hear a different one from the person who told it." "Ethan, if you won't do that," Ethan said, "then we go to the full proceeding, and the memo goes in front of the administrative judge, and the notebooks go in, and Ray Cortez testifies under oath, and we let the process run its course." He picked his wrench back up. "I'm not in a hurry. I've been waiting 7 years. I can wait a little longer." Diane was quiet for 3 full seconds, which for Diane was a long time. "All right," she said. "I'll take that to them. Mug." The negotiation took 4 weeks. They were not 4 easy weeks. Brandon's attorneys pushed back on every element, tested every boundary, offered alternatives that were technically compliant with the letter of what Ethan had asked for while gutting the spirit of it. Public statements with language so lawyered it said nothing, royalty arrangements with formulas that looked fair on paper and weren't, patent corrections timed and phrased to minimize press coverage. Each time Diane came back to Ethan with the counteroffer, and each time Ethan said some version of "no, that's not what I asked for," and each time Diane went back. It was exhausting. It was also, in a way that Ethan hadn't quite anticipated, clarifying. Every refusal told him something about what he actually needed from this, separated the things that mattered from the things that were just noise. He wasn't trying to destroy Brandon Pierce. He didn't want Aerosynth to collapse. There were 40 employees at that company who had nothing to do with what their founder had done in 2018, and they didn't deserve to lose their jobs over it. He didn't want money in quantities that would complicate his life. He wanted his name in the right place. He wanted the record to say the true thing. He wanted his son to be able to look it up. That was the whole of it. And when he held that clearly, the negotiations were less painful than they might have been, because he always knew exactly which line he was standing on. Sophia called every few days. sometimes with updates from her own legal team, who were negotiating the licensing restructure in parallel. Sometimes just to check in, which she did in her particular way. Direct, brief, without a lot of scaffolding. She would ask how things were going, he would tell her accurately, she would give him whatever information was relevant from her end, and then sometimes the conversation would go somewhere else. They talked about her company's expansion into sustainable aviation fuel infrastructure. They talked about Noah's school project on the Wright brothers, which Noah had approached with the focused intensity of someone who had recently developed a personal relationship with the idea that inventors deserved credit. They talked about a carburetor problem on a 1974 Piper Cherokee that Ethan was finding genuinely interesting in the specific way that old aircraft problems were interesting. The engineering of a different era, solving different constraints with different assumptions. He noticed at some point that he was looking forward to those calls, not just the informational ones, the other ones. He wasn't sure what to do with that noticing yet, so he mostly just let it sit there and focused on the work in front of him. The agreement was reached on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the supplemental filing, 22 days after the gala. Diane called him at 8 in the morning while he was driving Noah to school. "They signed," she said. He pulled over to the side of the road. Noah looked up from the book he was reading. "What?" Noah said. "1 second," Ethan told him. Into the phone. "All of it?" "All of it." Diane's voice had something in it that he'd never quite heard from her before. A warmth underneath the professionalism. The sound of someone who had worked for something and watched it come through. "The patent correction is being filed today as a consent agreement. Your name goes on as co-inventor. The USPTO will publish the correction in the official record within 30 days. The Foundation has been notified and will update their documentation accordingly." The statement? Brandon is making a public statement tomorrow. His attorneys negotiated the language, but the substance is there. He acknowledges that the detection methodology was co-developed, that the patent filing omitted your name due to decisions he made, and that the omission was wrong. A pause. It's not everything you might have wanted to hear from him, but it's said in public under his name, and it can't be walked back. Ethan sat in his truck on the side of the road with the engine running and Noah watching him from the passenger seat with that serious, patient attention. "The royalty arrangement?" he asked. "Restructured. Retroactive acknowledgement in the form of a lump settlement. I won't say the number on the phone, we'll talk about it later, but it's fair. Going forward, you'll receive a co-inventor share of licensing revenues from all active agreements, including Bennett Aerospace Holdings." A pause. Sophia's team was very firm on that last part. "I bet they were," he said. "Ethan." Diane's voice settled into something quieter. "It's done. Not perfect. These things never are. But done." He looked out the windshield at the ordinary street, the ordinary morning, the school 3 blocks away where his son would spend another day being 9 and learning things and eating lunch with his friends, and not yet knowing that his father's name had just been put back in the place where it belonged. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "Thank your footnote," Diane said. "I just followed the paper." He hung up and sat there for a moment. Noah closed his book. "Dad." "Yeah. Was that it? Is it done?" "It's done." Noah looked at him carefully, the way he always did when he was deciding whether the adult version of a thing matched the reality of it. "Are you happy?" Ethan thought about that. Happy was a word that didn't quite fit the shape of the feeling. It was too simple, too clean, too single-noted for something that had this much history in it. What he felt was more complicated than happy. It was the feeling of a man who had been carrying a stone in his chest for 7 years and had just set it down and was now noticing how much his body had adapted to the weight, how strange it felt to stand without it, how it would take some time to learn to move differently. "Yeah," he said. "I think so, yeah." Noah nodded once, decisively, like a matter had been voted on, and the motion had passed. He picked his book back up. "Good. Now can we go? I don't want to be late." Ethan laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded, and pulled back onto the road. Okay. Brandon Pierce's public statement went out on a Friday morning. It was posted on the Aerosynth website, sent to industry publications, and distributed by his attorneys to the Foundation and to the USPTO. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph described the development of the Aeroscan technology in language that, for the first time, used both names. The core detection methodology was developed collaboratively by Brandon Pierce and Ethan Walker during their graduate research at the University of Michigan. The foundational work was substantially Ethan Walker's. That sentence, substantially Ethan Walker's, had been the last thing Brandon's attorneys had fought to remove from the statement, and the last thing Diane had refused to let go. It was 5 words. It was also, in the context of 7 years of a company built on the opposite claim, the most significant 5 words in the document. The second paragraph acknowledged the patent filing. The 2018 patent application was filed under my name alone. This was a decision I made, and it was wrong. The correct co-inventor should have been listed from the beginning. The third paragraph was the one that Ethan read 3 times. It was the shortest. It said, "I am sorry to Ethan Walker for the professional and personal harm this caused him over many years. This statement does not undo that harm. It is the most I am able to offer, and it is insufficient. I offer it anyway." Ethan sat in the hangar office with the printed statement in his hand and read that last paragraph 3 times, and then set the paper on the desk and looked at it. It was not, as Diane had said, everything. It did not give back the 6 years. It did not give back the money he hadn't made, the sleep he hadn't gotten, the conversations he'd had with himself in parking lots and garages about whether it was worth fighting and whether anyone would ever care about the truth. It did not give back the version of his career that might have existed if his name had been on the patent from the beginning. The partnerships, the visibility, the open doors in an industry that rewarded the credited and ignored the uncredited. But it was said in public, under Brandon's name, in the official record that his son would one day read. He folded the paper and put it in the same filing cabinet where he kept Noah's birth certificate. The industry response was not what Ethan had expected, mostly because he hadn't let himself form expectations about it. He'd been deliberately careful about that, about not needing the world to react in a particular way, because needing things from the world was how you set yourself up to be disappointed by it. But it happened anyway. Dr. Sandra Okafor, the Caltech expert who had written the 43-page technical analysis, published an editorial in Aviation Systems Quarterly that walked through the development of the Aeroscan methodology and identified clearly and publicly the specific contributions that were documented in Ethan's notebooks. She was precise and technical and completely without editorializing, which somehow made it more devastating to Brandon's legacy and more significant to Ethan's than any more emotional account would have been. 3 aerospace engineering publications contacted Ethan for interviews. He gave one of them, a technical interview, not a personal one, focused on the methodology itself and the engineering problems it solved. He talked about the rolling vibration threshold analysis, the way he always talked about work he found genuinely interesting, which was to say with more animation than he usually showed about most things. The interviewer, a woman who had been covering the industry for 20 years, told him afterward that she hadn't expected him to be so passionate about the technical side of it. And he'd said, slightly confused, "What else would I be passionate about?" which she seemed to find both funny and illuminating. The Foundation announced that the Innovation Award for Diagnostic Systems would be reconsidered in the following year's cycle, with Ethan Walker listed as eligible nominee. He received this information from Sophia, who called to tell him in a tone that suggested she expected him to be pleased and was braced for him to be characteristically understated about it. "They're going to consider you for the award," she said. "Okay," he said. "Ethan." "What?" "That's a significant thing." "I know." He was in the hangar. He was always in the hangar when she called. He'd started to notice that. "I appreciate it. I do. He paused. "The award isn't the thing. The award was never the thing." "What's the thing?" He thought about how to say it. "Noah's going to study engineering someday. I'm pretty sure of it. And when he does, he's going to come across the Aeroscan system in a textbook or a course or a technical manual, and it's going to have my name on it as co-inventor. And he'll know, not because I told him, but because the record says so, that his father built something real." He paused. "That's the thing." The silence on Sophia's end was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who had just heard something that had landed precisely and was letting it. "Come to New York this weekend," she said. He blinked. "What?" "I'm not asking you to a business meeting. I'm asking you to come to New York this weekend." "Saturday. There's a museum exhibit on the history of aviation diagnostics that I've been meaning to see, and Noah would probably find it interesting, and I'd like to—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I'd like to see you both. Not about the case, just because I'd like to." It was the most unguarded thing she'd said to him in the months they'd been working through this together. He could hear it in her voice, the slight departure from her usual precise control, the small vulnerability of saying "I'd like to" without a professional reason attached. He looked around the hangar. The Beechcraft was done. The Cherokee was done. There was nothing on the schedule for Saturday that couldn't move. "Noah likes exhibits," he said. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He could hear the smile before she managed to neutralize it. "Good. I'll send you the details." Well, they went on a Saturday in November, when the city had gone cold and bright, and the trees in Central Park were stripped down to their bones, and the light had that particular quality of late autumn in New York. Low and direct, making everything cast a longer shadow than usual. The exhibit was at the Intrepid, which Noah thought was the best possible venue for any exhibit about anything because it was on an aircraft carrier, which immediately elevated it to the highest tier of places he had ever been. He walked through the entrance with his hands in his pockets and his head going in 3 directions at once, trying to look at the carrier's deck and the exhibit entrance and the Hudson River all simultaneously. Sophia met them outside. She was in a heavy coat and flat boots, hair down, looking different from either version of herself that Ethan had known. Not the tarmac CEO, not the hotel room investigator, just a person on a Saturday morning in November. She looked, he thought, more comfortable than he'd seen her, like she'd set something down too. She shook Noah's hand with the same directness she brought to everything, and Noah, to Ethan's mild amazement, shook it back with equal seriousness. "You're the Gulf Stream lady," Noah said. "I am," Sophia said. "You're the son who told your father to charge more." Noah looked at his father. "You told her that?" "She told me," Ethan said. "It was good advice," Sophia said. "I stand by it." Noah appeared to decide that this woman was acceptable. He turned back toward the exhibit entrance. "Can we go in?" They went in. The exhibit was comprehensive, the full arc of aviation diagnostic technology, from the earliest mechanical fault detection systems to modern computerized monitoring, the problems engineers had been solving across a century of making machines that flew and needed to be kept flying. Ethan moved through it the way he moved through anything related to engineering, unhurried, reading everything, occasionally stopping to look at something for longer than necessary because he found it genuinely interesting. Sophia kept pace with him. Noah ran slightly ahead and then came back to report on things he'd found. They were in a section near the end of the exhibit, Modern Avionics Diagnostics, the Contemporary Systems, when Noah stopped in front of a display panel and called back without particular drama, "Dad, come look at this." Ethan walked over. The panel was describing Aeroscan, the history of the system, its development, its applications across commercial and private aviation. It was a general audience description, not highly technical, the kind of language a museum used to make engineering accessible. And at the bottom of the panel, in the source citations, there was a reference to the corrected patent filing, with both names. Adaptive Ground Fault Detection System for Multi-Bus Avionics Architecture. Co-inventors: Brandon Pierce, Ethan Walker. Noah was looking at it with a particular expression, not excitement, not surprise. Something more settled than those things. The expression of someone seeing a thing they already knew to be true, confirmed in a place where strangers could read it. "There it is," Noah said. "There it is," Ethan agreed. They stood there together for a moment, the 3 of them, in the particular quiet of an exhibit space where the sound of other visitors moved around them like water around stones. Ethan looked at his name on the panel and felt something that he didn't try to analyze or articulate, just let it be what it was. The specific and irreducible feeling of a man who had spent 7 years being invisible to the official record and was, in this moment, no longer. Sophia was standing slightly behind him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had understood from the beginning what this was really about. had followed the footnote to its source, had committed resources and time and professional capital to making this moment possible, and she was standing in it now without claiming any of it for herself. That, Ethan thought, told you everything about a person. Noah read the panel one more time, then looked up at his father. "Can we see the aircraft deck?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Let's go see the deck." They spent 3 hours on the Intrepid. Noah asked 11 questions that the exhibit staff couldn't answer, and 2 that Ethan could, which was the ratio Noah typically achieved in any educational environment. He bought a patch from the gift shop, an embroidered carrier badge, and wore it stuck to his jacket sleeve the entire train ride home, which Ethan suspected he would also wear to school on Monday, school dress code being a rule that Noah observed with the selective compliance of a child who had decided that patches were not technically in violation. On the platform at Penn Station, waiting for the train back to New Jersey, Sophia stood with them because she was heading uptown and hadn't left yet, and the natural endpoint of the goodbye kept extending, the way goodbyes do when no one is quite ready for them. "He's a good kid," she said, watching Noah, who had wandered to the edge of the platform to look at the train schedule board with apparent deep interest. "He's better than I deserve," Ethan said. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Undersell yourself on the thing you're most responsible for." She looked at him with the particular directness she used when she meant something. "He's good because of how you raised him. That's not modesty. It's just wrong math." He looked at her. "You're very comfortable correcting my math." "Someone has to be." A pause. The platform noise moved around them. Announcements, arrivals, the percussion of a busy Saturday at Penn Station. "Ethan." "Yeah." "I'd like to keep... when this is formally..." She stopped. Started again. He noticed that she rarely started things over. She was usually too precise for it. "I'm not good at this particular kind of conversation." "Neither am I," he said, which was true and also somehow made it easier. She looked at the middle distance for a moment, then back at him. "I'd like to not disappear from your life when the legal process wraps up. I'd like to stay in it, in whatever way makes sense." A pause. "I don't know exactly what that looks like." "Neither do I," he said again. "That doesn't bother you?" He thought about that honestly. 6 months ago, it might have. He'd spent years building his life around knowable quantities, manageable variables, things he could predict and plan for. The unknowable had done enough damage to him that he'd gotten careful about inviting more of it in. But this was a different kind of unknown. Not the kind that threatened what he'd built. The kind that added to it. "No," he said. "It doesn't bother me." The train announcement came. Noah appeared at Ethan's side with the automatic timing of a kid who had learned to monitor his father's awareness of train schedules. Sophia looked at Noah. "It was good to meet you. Officially." "You too," Noah said. He thought for a second. "My dad talks about you." "Noah?" Ethan said. "What?" "He does." Noah looked at Sophia with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to be embarrassed by accurate statements. "He uses your regular voice when he talks about you, not his phone voice." Sophia blinked. "His regular voice?" "He has different voices for different people. His phone voice is..." Noah demonstrated a brief, clipped professional tone. "But when he talks about you, it sounds normal." He considered this as though it were straightforwardly factual. "I think that means he likes you." There was a moment of silence that Ethan filled by looking very intently at the train. "Good to know," Sophia said, and there was something in her voice that she made no attempt to suppress, something warm and genuine and not at all controlled. She looked at Ethan. "Regular voice." "We have a train to catch," Ethan said. "You do?" She stepped back. "Text me when you get home." "Okay." They boarded. Ethan found seats and Noah pressed his face to the window as the train began to move, watching the platform recede. And Sophia on it, one hand raised, watching them go. "Dad," Noah said. "Yeah." "You should call her." "I literally just agreed to text her when we get home." "That's not what I mean." Noah peeled away from the window and looked at his father with an expression of infinite 9-year-old patience. "I mean, call her. like an actual call, to just talk, not about the patent stuff. Ethan looked at his son. When did you get so confident about other people's lives? I pay attention, Noah said, and put his earbuds in and turned back to the window. The train moved through the tunnel under the river and came out into the gray November afternoon on the New Jersey side, the skyline of Manhattan receding behind them, the familiar flat landscape of exit ramps and industrial buildings, and the particular geography of a life that was modest and real and honestly earned. Ethan leaned back in his seat and looked at the ceiling of the train car and thought about the 7 years and about what they'd cost him and about what they'd built in him despite themselves. The patience, the precision, the specific knowledge of how to find the thing everyone else had missed, the ability to sit with a problem until it told you the truth. Those things hadn't come from the easy years. They'd come from the hard ones. He didn't feel grateful for the theft. He wasn't built for that particular kind of acceptance. But he could look at what he'd become in the wreckage of it and find something worth keeping. His name was on the patent now. His name was on that museum panel, and on the USPTO record, and on the corrected licensing agreements, and on Dr. Okafor's published analysis, and on the Foundation's updated documentation. His name was in every place it should have been 7 years ago, restored by evidence and time, and the stubborn insistence of a footnote that someone had actually bothered to read. And his son was sitting next to him with his face turned to the window, wearing a patch on his jacket sleeve, going home. That night, after Noah was in bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table in the steady light of the overhead bulb, fixed, no longer flickering, a small thing that had somehow started to represent something larger to him. And he thought about what Diane had said on the morning the memo was discovered. Thank your footnote. I just followed the paper. He'd put his name in a footnote because it was the only place he had left to put it, because he'd been trained to document and attribute and acknowledge, and he'd kept doing it even when the system that was supposed to reward that had failed him completely. He'd kept doing it in an empty hangar in New Jersey, in service reports that nobody was going to read, charging fair prices to people who expected to be overcharged, doing the work honestly because the work was the work, regardless of whether anyone was watching. He hadn't done it as a strategy. He hadn't done it because he expected it to lead anywhere. He'd done it because it was what you did when you were the kind of person he was, and the kind of person he was, it turned out, was worth being. Not because it had been rewarded, but because it had been right. That was the thing about integrity that nobody advertised, because it was a genuinely hard sell. It didn't protect you. It didn't prevent the theft or stop the friend from signing the paperwork wrong, or keep the years from passing while you worked in a hangar that nobody famous had ever heard of. Integrity didn't do any of those things. What it did was leave a trail of notebooks and time-stamped emails and accurate service reports and footnotes in the right places, the accumulated evidence of a person who had behaved honestly even when the world gave him no particular reason to. And sometimes, not always, not reliably, not with any guarantee, someone followed the trail. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Sophia's name. It was late. She was probably working. She always seemed to be working. The specific occupational hazard of a person who had built something from nothing and hadn't quite figured out how to stop running yet. He knew that about her now. He also knew she kept coffee in her hotel rooms at 10 p.m. and read service reports at night and asked uncomfortable questions because the answers mattered to her, and that she drove herself to meetings rather than sending drivers when she wanted to actually think about what she was walking into. He knew she kept her word. He knew she was better at sitting in silence than most people he'd met. He knew she'd stood on a curb in Midtown Manhattan and watched his cab until it turned the corner. He sent her a text. Home safe. Noah wore the patch on the train. Her reply came back in under a minute. Of course he did. Good night, Ethan. He set the phone on the table and looked at the kitchen. The steady light, the scratch table, the refrigerator with Noah's latest drawing on it, the window over the sink showing nothing but his own reflection in the dark outside. It was not a dramatic life. It had never been. It was a life built at close range, in real materials, by a man who had been knocked sideways by something terrible and had gotten back up and built anyway. It had gaps in it and rough edges, and the particular wear marks of years lived without much margin. It was not the life he'd imagined at 23, standing in front of a whiteboard full of equations, sure the future was a certainty. It was better, actually, in the ways that mattered. His name was on the patent. His son was asleep down the hall. And somewhere in Manhattan, a woman who had read a footnote was going to get a call from him tomorrow. Not his phone voice. His regular one. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed.